I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday, July the 12th. We are wrapping up the NFC South division. We'll be looking at the Falcons and the Panthers today. Dennis, I hope you are staying cool out there. We broke a temperature record here in Colorado Springs today of 99, which I know in a lot of parts of the country they don't think that sounds that hot, but the all-time record in any point in time since 1894 in Colorado Springs, where I live, is 101. So we are pretty close to breaking an all-time temperature record. And let me tell you, when you're at 6,300 feet, it feels like a good 10 to 12 degrees hotter than whatever the air temperature is.
Well, you're 6,300 feet closer to the sun, so I guess that the science makes sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been like 110, 115 in California, and sometimes when it's here, when it's like upper 90s, it feels hotter, feels worse. Plus, we're just ill-equipped, just in general. I'm ill-equipped for the super cold too, but it's after living here, I don't know, I've become ill-equipped.
Yeah, it's plenty hot here. I think it was in the high 80s today, and I was bummed. I forgot to tell the kid to turn my air on in the studio at like 3:00. It was like 5:30 when I was texting him going, "Hey, go turn the air on in my studio." So it's a little warmer in here than I like it, but
it's because you have all those hot takes about the Falcons.
Well, we'll see. We shall see.
Well, the good news is for hot takes on the Falcons and the Panthers, you won't have to listen to just the two of us. We have a special guest joining us today, another member of our Roundtable Dynasty League. He will also be in the Redraft League with us as well, and that is Jonathan Weber. Jonathan, thank you for coming to hang out with us on a Friday night.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure.
So I got to be honest, Matt. I think we got to stop inviting Jonathan to the leagues because he keeps winning.
I know he's done very well. He's always playing with us. One of these days we'll get over on. Although everyone beats me. Your wife took me out last year, so it doesn't matter that much. So obviously you've been in a lot of leagues with us, Jonathan. How did you first get into fantasy football?
I can't even remember how I seem so old in terms of like when did I first start? I probably started like way back in so I'm about to be 42, so I probably started probably in grad school, so like 2000 and sometime between 2004 and 2006 when I was doing my master's, and it was just a way like I guess the kind of strangest thing about me would be that I don't really watch a lot of football. I watch like football, like soccer football, but I don't watch like American football, like the Super Bowl or any, and I don't have a team, which I'm sure we'll talk about here as well. But the point being, it's like, but I like the concept and the competition behind fantasy football, and I like the research. And so sort of what we were talking about earlier as a person with a PhD in history that likes to do research and nerd out when I get to do research, especially related to Mexico, which is my area, obviously unrelated to fantasy football, Mexico. But that was kind of where it was just that, and that I would play for a little bit of money, and that always made things, a little bit more palatable in terms of engagement for me.
Yeah, I love to listen to you kids talk about starting your fantasy football career so long ago.
When did you start?
I honestly, I started in the 90s, but it was, we were still doing, waiting for USA Today to come out on Monday, the commissioner to hand score it, having to call in our teams.
Well, my first fantasy teams, we didn't have smartphones. I think we talked about this just before we went on the air. For the kids that are out there, smartphones didn't come into existence until 2007. They have not even 20 years old. So you obviously didn't have the apps and stuff that tallied. It tallied it on the website. But when I first started, the apartment I lived in, I didn't have Wi-Fi. So there were a couple of nights where I was watching the Monday Night Football game, trying to tally the points in my head to see if I bridged the gap, and going to sleep thinking, you know what, I think I just did that, and then racing to work in the morning to pop open ESPN to validate my arithmetic. Back when people actually did math in their head. See, we told you. You said you were feeling old when you came in here. You came to the right place. This is the old man corner hour.
We can just do old man takes.
So you said you don't watch a lot of games, but when you do watch games, then do you just tend to try to watch the players you have on your team just to see how they're?
Yeah, so I will 100%. I'll check that. Not necessarily that I'll watch the games per se. Like I may catch, because okay. So here's the thing for me is, like I said, is like I'm a soccer person. So usually my Sundays are dedicated to watching Tottenham, which is my EPL team. So like when those get, like I'll watch that. I'll watch highlights of EPL or anything else. And so for fantasy purposes, when games are starting in the afternoon, like I'm aware of what's going on in terms of scores. I'll check in on and everything like that. And I might turn on an occasional game but I like teams. It might not just necessarily be like players that I have, but like teams that I like to watch. So, like the Chiefs. Okay. Like I live in Dallas, but I don't want to watch the Cowboys, I'm good. I don't really want to watch them, but but somewhere like the Chiefs, San Francisco, like people that just have like interesting offenses, and like to do, I really do enjoy like a gadget play, and a very like sort of non-traditional approach to football, to like the X's and O's, I guess, of what people think of when it comes to football.
That feels like another big thing that has changed in the way you can. I remember as a kid when you were growing up, you got what you got, and if you didn't want to watch those teams, you didn't get to watch anything. Now, God bless Red Zone, you could just watch the fun offensive plays from. There's something satisfying about just sitting there and kind of getting cool snippets of all the games.
Yeah, I would say that, and that, I have YouTube TV, so it's difficult. You can't get all the games, right? So like I only get a few of the games, and I don't have Red Zone because I don't watch it. Or I guess I do get Red Zone. I don't have the package because it's like I don't want it.
Yeah,
it's for me to do that, and the cost doesn't make any sense.
But
it's like but that is the one good thing I will say of Twitter. There's a lot of bad things, but it's the same thing for soccer too. It's like I can get certain highlights, that like otherwise I would have to wait forever on like an ESPN or something to like be able to actually watch. So,
and then you're also spared the heartbreak of when your team sucks, as Dennis and I have known for many years. Dennis's team has rallied this last few years. My team,
one pride, baby,
going the other way. Well, let's talk quickly about your Roundtable Dynasty League team. You have a pretty formidable starting lineup. So we play Superflex. You got Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott. You hammered the running backs. You got McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Swift up there in the starting lineup. What was your strategy, and how did you feel about the final product?
Yeah, so I think like I'm looking at it because we were talking about that right before in terms of who did I have, and I think like then it does sort of drop off, and And
unfortunately, yeah, Bo Nix. So on behalf of Denver, I apologize.
You know what? I'll give you a hot take on Bo Nix. My hot take on Bo Nix is I actually think he's going to be like now. I don't know about fantasy wise. I think he'll be serviceable within Denver is and I do have a hot take on Carolina, but we can
considering that here they're talking about unironically that Jarrett Stidham's going to be the starter, and apparently Jarrett Stidham is running the wide receiver camp this week that all the wide receivers went to.
I mean, that might last like a couple of weeks.
On to 20. No,
I don't think he'll finish this. I don't think he'll finish
on to 2025. I think they're trying to get the top pick. In which case, can we just have some fun and throw Zach Wilson out there? I mean,
Oh no, you don't want that.
I do if we're trying to get the number one pick.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
I don't want to watch us lose a succession of 20 to 19 games. I'd rather lose a succession of, oh my God, we just got blown out games.
Yeah. Well, luckily I don't have too many Broncos besides my faith in I do have Troy Franklin because I
but that's a stack. That's a stack that makes sense. If you're into Bo Nix, especially now that they've really started talking the last 2 days that they're going to trade Courtland Sutton.
Yes. So like in terms of the other options, I mean, I love Lamar. I know, like, I just have an affinity for Lamar. I think ever since when he was at Louisville, like, I thought, like, he's a guy and he's somebody that is very unorthodox. Like, I like just watching him. Like, I'm going to watch somebody. Like, and I like quarterbacks in particular that are not just necessarily pocket passers. Like, I like guys that can improvise with their legs. And so he's just a big, like, I'm a fan of him in general. And then, like, you know, C-Mac, there's nothing I can really, the guy's he's a beast, and you got to gamble on him whether he's going to be healthy or not. But like, I think he's worth the gamble, assuming they can help him. Saquon with a little bit of a gamble, but I like, from what I've seen of the little bit that I watch, but, you know, reading and looking at all the stats and stuff, I like Philly. And so I think he's a good fit for that offense and gives them something different than what they've had kind of in the past in terms of someone. Now the only issue becomes the narrative of, like, you know, is he in the best shape of his life, and, you know, the off season situation, like, cause he looks shredded. I don't know if you've seen those pictures. I mean, the guy looks, I want whatever he's on. And then I think he's gonna do better than people than people may think. And then, you know, then I start to kind of die off. DeAndre Swift, I've always liked him. Again, I think he just has a very kind of unique running style, and he's fun. He's soft.
You know, going back to Saquon, he may have some extra motivation if he's been watching Hard Knocks off season with the Giants, because they've spent a lot of time with Joe Shane kind of talking about why Saquon Barkley's not worth the money and why they thought they could get him for cheap while they were pursuing other people. And I'm like, bro, this didn't work out for you. We already know that because time has passed. It's like watching a slow motion train wreck. I watched some of their interviews and some of their discussion of draft selections, and honestly, they said some things about Malik Neighbors that I didn't think sounded that great that they put in the show, and I'm like, oh, I'm sure he's happy to come to work every day.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, there's so much. So, I mean, just in the general on my team, I think, you know, like at QB with Dak, with Lamar, with with the running back room, my receivers are a little suspect with, you know, DK and Terry and Deontay, but I mean,
and you also picked up Spencer Rattler, which we talked about the Saints on Tuesday, and both Dennis and I think there's some potential there. Maybe not as much at the beginning part of this year, but potentially long term, since we are a dynasty, of him getting a shot.
Yeah, Theo Johnson at tight end, since Waller's not there, maybe, who knows? And then, you know, if Luke McCaffrey can do, and I don't know, you know, you may have more inside knowledge into McCaffrey from his from his dad playing out there than.
Well, and I listened to Ed McCaffrey kind of talks about his son on the morning drive when he's on. He's on there once a week on NFL Network Radio, and they talked about him a few times during the draft. That could be interesting. It's hard to tell Washington's offense, but you definitely gave yourself some players that some young players that have a chance to grow in, and some potentially good players for this year. We will talk about Deontay Johnson here in a minute because he's made his transition to this NFC South division. Well, let's transition and look at our teams. First team up is the Atlanta Falcons. In 2023, they finished 7-10, third in the NFC South. Key departures for them: Desmond Ridder was traded, the quarterback, to the Arizona Cardinals, where he'll probably be a backup. Cordero Patterson, running back, left to follow Arthur Smith, their former head coach, to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Van Jefferson, wide receiver, also left for Pittsburgh. Jonnu Smith, tight end, went to Miami. Bud Dupree, linebacker, is gone. Trey Flowers and Jeff Okudah, two corners, are gone. But among their additions, they went out and got themselves a potential upgraded quarterback in Kirk Cousins, who comes over from the Minnesota Vikings, coming off an Achilles injury, but should be an instant upgrade if he can get out there. They improved their wide receiver core as well, grabbing Darnell Mooney from Chicago and getting Rondale Moore from the Cardinals back in the trade for Ridder. Then in the draft, they shocked us all and took Michael Penix Jr. as their number one draft pick at quarterback. Later, they grabbed running back Jace McClellan. They also grabbed Braylon Trice, a defensive end. 2023 fantasy finishes: Desmond Ridder was quarterback 22. Taylor Heineke, who's still on the roster, was quarterback 42, started a few games down the stretch. By comparison, Cousins was QB 24, only played, I believe, the first 5 weeks of the season before getting hurt, maybe 8 weeks of the season. Must have been 8 weeks of the season. So he was almost put up almost as good numbers in 7.5 games as Desmond Ridder managed his entire season. So should be better for them. Bijan Robinson, his rookie year, finished as running back 9. Tyler Algier was running back 36. Drake London finished as wide receiver 37. Rondale Moore was wide receiver 66 for the Cardinals. Darnell Mooney, who missed some time, was wide receiver 83 in Chicago. Kyle Pitts was tight end 13. Jonnu Smith, who's now gone, was tight end 17. Arthur Smith is gone. Kirk Cousins is potentially there. I will start with you, Jonathan. We've all been waiting for Kyle Pitts and Drake London to be unleashed, and for maybe people to remember that Bijan Robinson was a generational talent at running back. Are you excited at all about this Atlanta offense going into 2024?
No. No. I mean, I would say I think kind of like an interesting and you can tell me whether we can play this game or not, but I would like to play an over-under on where we think, like, and maybe this is coming later, of where we think those individuals will finish. And if it is, I'll hold off on that.
No,
but like, ahead. So like, oh, okay. So let we're going off the notes here. So like over under, I'm curious, and I'll include myself in it, but I'll go last. Kirk Cousins over under finishing at 24, QB 24. So I guess if we think what if he goes over, he finishes higher than 24. Yeah, we could go higher or lower if you want.
Over would be 25 and up. Under would be 23 and down. And I have him under, but I do have him in the QB2 range. I'm wondering if he's going to be a little bit slow to start coming off of injury with new players and a new scheme. But I think he's going to be a pretty solid QB2.
Yeah, I think he'll be if you had said QB 18, I'd have probably still taken the under. A lot of it will depend on, does the Achilles hold up? It's different for quarterbacks than running backs and wide receivers, but I think he's got good weapons. And Zach Robinson it wasn't like some of these coaches pass through these coaching trees and they're there for, a season and they're sprinkled with fairy dust. Zach Robinson was with Sean McVay for 5 years. And while I don't expect somebody to necessarily be the Cooper Kupp of the NFC South, I do think that it's going to be a pass-oriented offense.
Yeah. See, and when you said the 18, that's perfect because I have him at like 17.
Yeah,
so
I'm at 16,
that's
so.
about right where I think he's going. That is all predicated on that Achilles, right? Like without the Achilles, this like I can have a hot take about Bryce Young versus Aaron Rodgers, and who I think is going to be who's going to finish the season better. But
my question too is if Kirk isn't ready week 1, which is always a possibility, do they put Penix out there or do they put Heineke? That's what I think too. Is they probably do Heineke.
I think so.
Heineke.
I mean, so the Rams and Falcons, there was only a 2-play difference in the number of total plays, but the Rams threw 53 more pass attempts and had solid about 50 fewer rush attempts. So it was pretty evenly swapped.
We all saw Desmond Ridder throw. I don't think they were eager to have him throw more times last year.
So I would expect – I think the Falcons will be in the top half of the league in pass attempts if Cousins is healthy all year. They've got a narrow funnel. It's Pitts, it's London, it's Bijan. I do think, one of the people that's going to suffer is going to be Tyler Algier, who had 186 carries last year. I do think he kind of loses some luster now that Arthur is gone. But I think Pitt will have more than 90 targets.
Kirk Cousins last year played 7.5 games. I think he came out in that 8th game, but he started 8 games, threw 311 times. Ridder played in 13, started 13 games, threw it 388 times. So I think I think Cousins, the year before for Cousins, he threw it 643 times. He has 561 in 2021. He also has a much better completion percentage. So I think they will eclipse last year. Atlanta in total threw it 530 times. I think they're going to be between probably 570 and 600.
Now if they throw it so much, I guess then the follow up to what we were talking about would be like, do you see Bijan finishing at RB9, and or with that we could add Drake? Like, who do we say like eclipsing their last year mark?
So I think Bijan will absorb some touches from Algier. And the Vikings last year ran the 4th most plays in the NFL. Wait, that's not right. That is
well,
just where they were.
So
they ran fewer plays than
last year. Let's look. It's not just Algier, but Cordero Patterson had 50 carries last year too. So you're talking about 236 carries to 2 backup running backs, while Bijan only had 214 carries. I think Bijan Robinson will get closer to 250 carries. I also think he's a pretty decent receiver. He saw 86 targets, caught 58 last year. So you have that going for you. I think there's a chance he has better touchdown production this year. So I do have him. I mean, he was running back 9 last year, and they held him out in weird places, and they rotated in weird players for him in the red zone. I don't foresee that happening. I actually think he'll be better. I have him as a top 5 running back, but I guess you said you're not bullish on Atlanta. I'm more bullish in general. I bumped Drake London way up. I bumped Pitts up a little bit. I don't know about Mooney or Rondale doing great, but we've seen Kirk Cousins support even recently in Minnesota a high-end tight end and a high-end wide receiver and a high-end running back. Because when he had Cook in 22, Cook was a top 10 running back, and Justin Jefferson was wide receiver 1 overall, and Hawkinson was in the top 5 in tight ends. And I don't even know if they ran as many plays as what the Rams ran. So I think there is that potential as long as the line holds up in Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. My take on those three guys is like, I think Bijan finishes right about where he finished last year. I think he's going to be like 8, 9, or 10. Like that's about that latter third of the top 10. I think Drake, maybe he finishes about wide receiver 30, so he goes up about 7 spots. Pitts, I think he's going to be right where he is. I think maybe he's going to be right around that, like maybe like 12, 13, 14, like right in that area. I just don't. I mean, I could be totally wrong on his talent, but and the people throwing him the ball previously. But that, I mean, again, I think my big hesitation on the Falcons is an old quarterback with an Achilles injury coming back. Like, I mean, I know they're a different breed of people, but I think of, and I'm not a professional athlete, but I think of myself with it. I've got an AC joint separation that I've got to have surgery on. And so like, I might have to be just done with soccer. And it's like where you can see a little like bump here, it like bumps up, and they were like, we'll just give it time. And it's been since the end of February. And, I still can't really do what I could, you know what I mean? So I'm like, I know they're a different mode. They're not like a regular person, but anytime anybody has anything like that, I just always go right to soccer and think about, I know it's different, but like you still use your legs in a very similar fashion. So it's like, the same thing with Aaron Rodgers, he's like my age with that injury. Like, I don't think he's going to finish this. I'll be shocked if he finishes the season. Like as someone else, as another player with a similar injury. So I'm a little bit, I think Bijan, yes. And the others, slightly. Pitts maybe like just kind of right where he was, maybe up one, no dramatic jump from any of those positional players.
Yeah. I think Zach Robinson coming from LA and Sean McVay's coaching philosophy is going to stick to the narrow funnel for touches. So I do expect Pitt's targets to go up. It wouldn't surprise me if he had 120, 125 targets. And what Drake London last year had, 110. It wouldn't surprise me if he was in the 130 range. The one I think may lose a few targets might be Bijan, but I think he more than makes up for it. And by losing, maybe drops from 86 to 75. So, but I think he'll make up those points with carries and touchdowns. So I'm in on the Vikings top 3.
So let me give you this that might. So Dan Marino tore his Achilles tendon in 1993, a time when medical science and rehab and things were not what they are now. I don't think of Cousins as a particularly mobile or running quarterback. Marino in his next season came back, started all 16 games, threw it 615 times for 4,453 yards and 30 touchdowns, and played 6 more seasons after tearing his Achilles tendon as a starter, during which time he was, it's hard to separate them all out. He was 10-6, 9-5, 7-6, 9-7, 10-6, and then 5-6 his last season when he was injury shortened. So he played 3 full seasons after that, threw the ball a ton of times, and I mean 615 would be a lot now, so it was a metric ton. So I mean,
it might be more just like from my perspective, like we were talking before, is like from just soccer watching and thinking about how much you have to run. Whereas you're right, Cousins isn't Lamar Jackson. Cousins isn't even Mahomes, or you know what I mean. He's not running. So like there's a difference between sitting in the pocket and then like, I mean, he just absorbs sacks, rather than take off to avoid sacks. to avoid potentially with that. I mean, it also, I mean, who knows? I just know he's an older dude with an Achilles, and I know medical science is what it is, but it's like age is also what it is too. And it's like at some point it does, even as a professional athlete, like it does catch up with you.
Yeah, Marino is a little bit younger he's a little bit younger than what Cousins.
He's what, late 30s, Cousins?
Yeah, so Vinny Testaverde tore his Achilles tendon when he was 36 and came back and played the very next season. He started in 2000, the year 2000. He started all 16 games, finished 9-7, threw it 590 times. I mean, he wasn't as good of a passer as some of the other, so his stats won't look incredible. But, I mean, that would be right about on par with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is 35.
So he's not as old as I thought. He was a little bit older, but like,
Rodgers may be more of a concern because I actually thought his last year in Green Bay, some of his skills had eroded, and then he went to a new team and blew out his Achilles, missed time, and now he's like 40 now. Won't he be 41 by the time?
Yeah, he's
starts?
close to my age. Yeah, I don't think he finishes the season. Is what
Whatever the opposite of magical is, Dennis and I have talked about this, is what happens to you when your age gets a 4 in it.
Oh, you just get that. Well, the worst 2 injuries I've had are like this shoulder, and it was from a shoulder tackle and a fall, which I've done a gajillion times, and I have been playing since I was 4, and it was just I fell, and as soon as I fell, I knew something was wrong. And I had another injury in my late 30s, and I'd never really been hurt before then. So it's like
so the Falcons finished 7-10 last year, which was kind of underwhelming considering what some of the hopes were for the team. They made some big moves this offseason, flipped over the coaching staff. Dennis, I'll start with you. How do you think they finish?
I think they win the NFC South. I'm good with the talent that they have. I think they've made enough improvements on defense, and I think with Drake London, Bijan Robinson, and Kyle Pitts, you have a seasoned veteran quarterback that knows what the job is. And then you bring in an offensive coordinator that's going to narrow funnel the offense to your 3 best players. I have them at 11-6 winning the division.
John.
11-6.
How do you feel?
I think they finish. I don't know. I mean, I could guess a finish in terms of a record, but I think they don't reach 500.
So you have them just under they were 7-10 last year, so 7-8 wins.
Yes, I would say right around. Yes, I would say 7-10, 8-9, right around that where they finished last year. I don't know. I'm not as much of a believer.
I liked Atlanta last year. I liked the core that they had. I thought they should have been better, that they should have won 9 games and could have won the division last year. So I'm kind of with Dennis. I have them around 10 or 11 wins. I think they'll be the playoff team out of the NFC South. But a lot of it does hinge on whether or not Kirk Cousins comes back strong, because I don't know if I would have as much faith in Taylor Heineke or Michael Penix. I think if we didn't think Kirk Cousins was there, we'd be asking some of the same questions that we're asking about New England and Minnesota and Denver, who also have first-round draft pick quarterbacks that may or may not be the right answer for them. Our second team today has nowhere to go but up, and that is the Carolina Panthers. They were a woeful 2-15 last year, 4th in the NFC South. That was good enough to earn the first overall pick in the NFL draft, but it's a good thing they had traded that to Chicago, so they didn't even have the pick. They cleaned house midseason. Frank Reich did not work out, was 1-10 before being let go midway through his first season. They brought in Dave Canales, who was the offensive coordinator over at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. DJ Shark, wide receiver, is gone. Hayden Hurst, the tight end, is gone. They let go of Brian Burns, their best defensive player, and safety Von Bell. They brought in Rashad Penny, a running back, to add some depth, made a big trade for Deontay Johnson, a wide receiver that could give them a true number one. They picked up wide receiver David Moore. They picked up Jadeveon Clowney at defensive end. They grabbed Josie Jewell, a pretty good linebacker from Denver, and safety Nick Scott. In the draft, they grabbed running back Jonathan Brooks. They grabbed wide receiver Xavier Legette and tight end Jatavian Sanders. Fantasy finishes last year. Bryce Young, the number one overall pick, finished as QB 27, missed a couple of games. Andy Dalton, who's still there, finished as QB 53. In the backfield, Chuba Hubbard took control and finished as RB 27, while last year's big offseason signing, Miles Sanders, struggled mightily, finished as RB 52. Among wide receivers, Adam Thielen had a resurgence last year, finished as wide receiver 17, but he was much hotter beginning of the season than he was down the stretch. Their rookie last year, Jonathan Mingo, was wide receiver 81. By contrast, Deontay Johnson, who also missed time with injury, was wide receiver 45 for the Steelers. At tight end, Tommy Tremble was tight end 39. Hayden Hurst, who is gone, was tight end 50. Dennis, I'll start with you. Do you have fantasy expectations for this team? We saw Canales lead kind of a turnaround for Baker Mayfield and do some wonderful things with Tampa last year. He's got some weapons to play with. How are you feeling about these Carolina Panthers?
Well, I like that they brought in Canales after what he did with has-been Geno Smith and then crash and burn short Baker Mayfield. So he slides in with Bryce Young, who seems to be kind of a younger combination of Geno and Baker. He's short. He hasn't had a history of great decision-making in the NFL yet. The team has been awful. They fortified the offensive line, bringing in Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt, which, to me, it feels like they're going to focus on the run game this year. I know they brought over Deontay. They've still got Adam Thielen. They drafted Xavier Legette. They used the tight ends, Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble, kind of like sixth offensive linemen. I think there's going to be a lot of focus this year on building Bryce Young's confidence back up by keeping him from getting the shit kicked out of him. And so that's going to fall on the tight end and the offensive line. They're going to do it by running the ball. Chuba had a good season, maybe not great, but a good season. Jonathan Brooks looks like he's going to be ready for the start of the season. I feel bad for Miles Sanders. He had an opportunity and he spit the bit. And it's going to be wild when you see Sanders get cut and Rashad Penny make this team. And I feel like Chuba Hubbard is the back you want the first 6 or 7 weeks of the season. And then it's going to start to transition to Jonathan Brooks. And it's going to take some time. They'll run the ball. Adam Thielen still gets open, clearly lost a step. He's older. He's going to play out of the slot. Xavier Legette's very, very raw. And so I think the passing game, really the only asset I think I want to invest in is going to be Deontay Johnson. And he's probably going to be a wide receiver 3. So I don't think the team scores a ton of points. I don't know that I'm investing very much in redraft in any of them outside of Johnson, and I probably don't want Johnson any higher than my wide receiver 4 on my fantasy team.
Jonathan, how are you feeling about? You said you had an interesting take for the Panthers.
This is my hot take. This is who I like if you were to ask me who I've picked to win various conferences, this is who I picked to win the conference.
The Panthers?
Is the Panthers, yes.
Somebody's got to win it. So
yeah, I mean, I just feel like I agree with Dennis. There's a lot Dennis said that I think is very accurate and fair, and I agree. Like as we're looking at it, if I'm looking at my odds, if I were to place a wager, right now it's like plus 1,100 roughly for Carolina to win, and I don't see why they couldn't win. I mean, look what you're dealing with in that division. I mean, what their coach Canales was able to do with Baker, who had essentially got washed, and to like resurrect him into a solid, quarterback to where, Mike Evans, I know Mike Evans does what Mike Evans does. But I don't know if there is the same level of competence in the Tampa Bay organization to keep Baker from turning into a pumpkin. Without Canales now. Now, as it relates to like the running back position, I have a few shares of Chuba, but I don't have a lot. Now, Brooks, I tried to as best as possible within drafts to acquire him, but I think it's going to go the same way that Dennis is talking about. I think you're going to see from weeks all the way up to week like 6 through 8, it's going to be Chuba. And then you're going to see that slow transition of a 1A, 1B situation with Brooks. Give him as much time as possible for that knee to heal, just given the proclivity of a re-injury, a helmet to that area again. And the guy's done. Like, even
also,
with that,
rookie running backs are a little bit slower to pick up blocking schemes and things like that. Since
yes.
Carolina's line is still charitably a work in progress.
Correct. And I mean, and there are not tons of receivers. Actually, the person that outside of Johnson that I would look to invest in is Sanders at tight end. Like I know rookie tight ends, it never goes well. Like, year one. But who else?
Unless you're Sam Laporta.
Right. Yeah. I mean, unless you're put in the right position, right? And it's like, well, who else are you going to throw to in that offense? I mean, Thielen is Thielen. Johnson is Johnson. I think he'll actually do way better than he was doing at the tail end of his Pittsburgh years. Leggett, like Dennis mentioned, is very raw, but I'm interested. But it doesn't always, just because you're raw and you're big, doesn't make you DK Metcalf. Like it doesn't transcend you into this like solid wide receiver. And so like, I don't know what else they have other than when you look at Sanders, but I think it's a close. I think that this division is going to be close, and you're talking about maybe 1 or 2 more wins for the team that is, that's denoted the winner of the division. And so if I were to do that, I'm going to go with Carolina, and I like their over/under, their odds of going over 5.5 wins. I say over. I think they're going to beat their over, and I think they were 2 and something last year. Right?
They were 2 and 15.
Yeah,
I actually took their under.
Interesting. Okay.
So, I think Bryce Young will be better. I'm excited about Canales. I think the difference though between the project he had with Baker Mayfield and what he has with Bryce Young is Baker Mayfield may have hit a rough patch and kind of bottomed out. But we had seen him do it and thrive before, even starting as soon as his rookie year. He had some great seasons there in Cleveland. They constantly changed offensive coordinators. There were some struggles. And even when we saw the Baker we saw with the Rams was much better than the Baker we saw at the first few games with Carolina. So I think you were starting at a higher point. There were times last year where Bryce Young really looked lost. He started 16 games for this team, threw it 527 times, less than 60% completions, 2877 on yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, was sacked 62 times, didn't do a lot running. They need to work on the lines. They're trying to give him a little bit better protection. Hopefully he can rebound that completion percentage up a little bit and take steps. I think success for me for Carolina, yeah, if they won a division, that would be incredible success. But I also think going from 2-15 and a laughing stock to maybe a 4 or 5 win team that is feisty and competitive would also be a huge step in the right direction. Because if we looked at Houston per se, that season under Lovie Smith, I know last year they exploded and went into the playoffs, but even that season under Lovie Smith, you saw some of the younger players coming together, and they were a fun team to watch, and they were a competitive team to play, even if they didn't always have success. And that's kind of what I would hope for Carolina here. I think it's going to take them more than a year to build back up, because I think their front office and their coaching situation under Matt Rule and then Frank Reich was just not going in the right position. I'm kind of with you guys. Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, I think they're both going to be worth rostering. I think they're both going to finish in low-end RB3 or high-end RB4 numbers, because they'll probably end up splitting a lot of time even throughout the season, but eventually we'll see Brooks. I'm more bullish, I guess, on Brooks for 2025, I think, than I am for 2024. Among receivers, Deontay Johnson's the one I want to roster, but I'm like you, Dennis. I think he probably finishes in a low-end wide receiver 3. I think Thielen will contribute. They'll get some of these guys to contribute. I'm interested that you're excited about the tight ends, because it seems like word out of camp is Jatavian Sanders is still 3rd or 4th on the depth chart, and that they are content rolling Ian Thomas and then having Tommy Tremble, which, if that's the case, I'm not rostering a tight end from Carolina, because I don't think I'm going to get any, maybe in Dynasty you're putting Sanders on your practice squad, but I'm not rostering a Carolina tight end at this point, expecting that I'm going to get anything playable. I'm not sure that this offense will produce anything in the top 30 outside of quarterback in any of the skill positions.
Yeah, I think Jatavian Sanders he's going to have a week this year where he catches 3 passes for 47 yards and a touchdown, and then everybody starts the goose egg next week. Next year, he'll have 2 or 3 of those types of games. In 2 years, I think Bryce Young settles in. His confidence is back. Maybe Legette's getting it. Jonathan Brooks, they've added some more help. I think if you're in Dynasty and you're rebuilding and can pick up Xavier Legette or Bryce Young or Jatavian Sanders and hold them for a couple seasons, maybe you play them because you're trying to get better draft picks. Redraft, I'm Sanders is on my do not draft list.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like, I mean, I'm looking at, like, just based on talent alone, which I know is not always the way that coaches evaluate things. They've got other things they evaluate, or potential, right? Or just raw athleticism and things. So, like, yes, for redraft, I don't know if I would even touch. I probably wouldn't touch any of them, even though I think they might win. They might eke it out. Maybe Chuba Hubbard. Or Brooks for redraft. For Dynasty, I would say the only thing that would concern me is I don't know how cheaply people would sell Bryce Young to where I would look to acquire. Like, I'm talking like a 3rd, maybe. You know what I mean? Like, right. I no one's selling for that cheap. Like, they're going to want a 1st, and you're like, you're crazy. I'm not selling. I'm not paying a 1st. I'm not paying the tax for how he was drafted.
Some people took him at 101 too in rookie drafts, and I expect he's going to step up and finish in the QB2 range this year, but I think it's going to be slow going. And the unfortunate thing for him is he's going to be compared against his draft classmates, and CJ Stroud not only looked great last year, but they built a ton around him. I think he's an easy QB1. And Anthony Richardson, if he has an explosive year, it's going to put Bryce Young pretty far behind the 8 ball. I'm curious to see Young and Levis, I think, are the 2 out of that class that I have the most questions about going into this year and feel like they have the biggest wide range of outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on Stroud or Richardson. Like, those are guys I'm looking in either like a best ball situation or a redraft situation, or even Dynasty if someone's like I was trying to trade Mahomes in a 1 QB. but nobody wants to pay what you know what I mean? Like, because so it's difficult. And I was even trying to go down in terms of like quality for QB because I won, and I'm like, well, I need to strengthen other positions. But to your point, I think those are like rookie QB, or not rookies, I guess at this point, but second year QBs that you don't have to pull the trigger on, like a Josh Allen or a Mahomes or Burrow. You know, you could wait a little bit and then go for Stroud. I don't know how high he'll go. You know, how I think I've acquired like a couple of best balls I've done, not very many. I've been looking to get him in particular. So I'll just wait on everybody else.
So Jonathan picked them to win the South. I think 4 or 5 wins. Dennis, are you in this Goldilocks experiment? Are you between us, or are you?
I am not between you, and I am not Goldilocks in it. I have them at 3-14. I think it's going to be another rough season. I think they still need to add a lot of talent to get. Like, if you were to take any of the skill position players on this team, I would take Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White over all of them. And so while I love what Dave Canales can do, right now he's trying to mold a turd, not a block of clay. So we'll give him a season to work with it, and we'll see what happens next year. We're not expecting much.
An underrated, I think, that thing that factors in is they lost some top-end defensive talent because they decided they weren't going to compete, and they didn't want to pay Brian Burns. But I would bet that sets back. One of the better aspects of the team last year was they still had a pretty decent defense. I would bet their defense takes a little bit of a step back as their offense is trying to come up.
Yeah, I think what we'll see there is I don't envision one team pulling away so tremendously to where it's unfathomable that, you know, granted, yes, it is pie in the sky for me to assume that Carolina will win. And
I mean, there's one team that goes from worst to first every year. I think it's going to be the Bengals because that's a cheat. But I mean, we saw the Texans obviously went from the number 2 overall draft pick to 10-7, and in the second round of the playoffs. So
OH.
Yeah. What?
Said OH.
Ohio. So I mean, in the modern NFL, there is every year some team that had been horrendous the year before that pops up, and the Panthers definitely are in a division where anything is possible.
Yeah.
Well, that'll do it for us today and our look at the NFC South. Dennis and I will be back on Tuesday as we start the AFC South. Hey, speaking of CJ Stroud, we will be talking about him, the Texans, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. A couple of interesting teams there. But Dennis, if people are sweltering in the summer heat like I am, what can they do to fill those times when they just need to sit by the swamp cooler?
They can go to their favorite podcast platform, iHeartRadio, Sirius XM, Apple Podcasts, whatnot. Hit that search button for the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. Like, subscribe, leave a rating, leave a comment. Love that shit.
And Jonathan, before the episode, you had suggested something else that's going on, which I believe is Copa Americana. Give us your plug for it. I think we're up to the finals, right?
It's the finals this weekend on Sunday. So my picks for the Euro win will be Spain over England. That's not really that hard of a pick. And the next one's also not hard. I'm going to go Argentina over Colombia.
You know what is hard is the U.S. men's national team finding a coach that can actually get us anywhere.
Now you know who they're going to get. They're going to get Steve Cherundolo, and I'm going to be so sad. Anyway, we're getting inside soccer.
Are you even speaking English?
Yeah,
we kept it all football.
Was terrible.
You know? There's American football, and then there's traditional.
Exactly,
football.
and I wish they would go get the guy in where Dennis is and get that coach instead for the U.S. men's national team. for the crew.
I guess I didn't realize we didn't qualify for the Olympics either.
I think we're there. The U20, they're like U23s. You mean the regular? The U23s are there for the Olympics.
Yeah, because when they were talking about having to find a U.S. men's national coach, they said it was going to be quite some time before they had another competitive game lined up. I was like, oh, I guess that means.
Yeah, no, they just don't go to the Olympics. That's all. Like those guys don't go. It's like young guys.
Well, we'll see how it all shakes out. That'll do it for us today. So you download a podcast. You can have American football in one ear, and you can be watching traditional football on your TV on Sunday as we get ready, less than a month away from preseason returning. Football coming back very quickly.